Morning, and thank you for coming this morning. Welcome to Texas State University and the School of Nursing. I'm Marla Urban-Roseman, and I'm the Director for the School of Nursing and the Associate Dean for the College of Health Professions. We're pleased to host Mayor Ellen McGraw's State of the City address this morning. Texas State's very proud to be a member of the Round Rock community and has been an avid supporter of the community under Dr. Edna Rabine's direction. Dr. Rabine's the Executive Director for the Round Rock Higher Education Center. We look forward to increasing our community involvement as we grow our enrollment in the School of Nursing. I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Robert Peters this morning, who will formally introduce Mayor Ellen McGraw. Many of you know Dr. Peters from his work as a physician and as a staunch community supporter. Dr. Peters began his family practice in Round Rock in 1972, and at that time was the only physician in town. Over the past 39 years, he's watched the community grow, our population grow, and of course the healthcare options in the community grow as well. But he's done much more. He's not only observed that growth, he's helped grow the healthcare options in Round Rock. He was instrumental in bringing the first hospital to Round Rock and served in many roles at the Round Rock Medical Center through the years, including Chief of Staff, Vice Chief of Staff, and Chairman of the Department of Medicine. Currently, he's a member of the Board of Trustees. If you're not familiar with Dr. Peters from his medical center or his practice, you know him from his Friday night appearances on the sidelines of the Round Rock High School football games. He's been the team physician since 1972. His years of dedicated service were rewarded with a Lifetime Partnership Award in 2008 from the Round Rock ISD. Dr. Peters is board certified in family practice and osteopathic manipulative treatment. In addition to this, he's a certified aviation medical examiner for the FAA. I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Peters to the podium. Dr. Peters.
Thank you, Dr. Roseman, for that very nice introduction. I didn't realize I'd been here that long, but you have an incredible facility here, something the entire community can be extremely proud of, especially for turning out the caliber of nursing you're doing, and I personally know how important nursing is to the medical profession. When Ellen asked me to introduce him today, I was first concerned. I thought he may convince you that he was a great hunter. Then I was afraid he would ask me to stretch the truth. But fortunately, he didn't ask me to speak to you about his hunting abilities or compare them to my hunting abilities. Instead, he asked me to acknowledge how much work has gone into building our great community. Things we enjoy today did not just happen by accident. They're a result of a concerted effort by a lot of visionary people, many of whom are still with us, but many are not. But I can assure you that their impact is still felt today. The result, I'm happy to see that today's leaders are continuing to focus on the future. They realize good things that didn't happen but require vision and hard work. I believe our community is in good hands. Our leaders, one of our leaders is the mayor. It's my pleasure today to introduce Mayor Ellen McGraw.
Thanks, Dr. Peters, for that introduction, and maybe we should have talked about hunting a little bit. And Marla, thank you for the hosting us here in this incredible facility. But Dr. Peters, I have to ask you, did you ever imagine when you were the only doctor in town that you would ever be making an introduction in a Round Rock nursing school? No, I didn't. No. You know, I was indoors working on this speech Saturday morning, emphasizing I was indoors working on the speech. And the sun was shining, the cool breeze was blowing outside. And it occurred to me that, well, maybe I could just read what I wrote last year. I mean, the city manager wouldn't notice, and neither would the new CEO of the chamber. But as tempting as that was, I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Because it's really our new city manager and that new CEO that much of this speech is written for. Now, not just them, but we're fortunate at this point in time to have a whole host of new energetic leaders with new ideas and new experiences. And they are already proving themselves as effective leaders that have the quality to continue building Round Rock's success. I want to take an opportunity to introduce some of these leaders. You know most of them already, but I want to mention them anyway. First, City Manager Steve Norwood, President and CEO of the Chamber, Doug Kirkle, Planning Director Peter Wasaki, and I think he and Joe Vining are off actually doing some economic development somewhere, so he's not here today. The Economic Development Director of the Chamber, Ben White. Is Ben here today? Where's Ben? There's Ben. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce Ben White. Now, he's the only one in the room with a major highway named after him, so Avery was kind of poking me. He's not the only one. I said, Avery, yours is a little street. He's got a big highway. But other new faces will be here very soon. Lori Hadley will be taking on the role of Assistant City Manager within the next week or so. She'll join us from Prescott, having worked closely with Steve for a number of years. David Coatney will be taking over as Fire Chief, and he comes from San Antonio and has 25 years of experience there. And then Michelle Cervantes was recently promoted as a new Library Director. Now, during my last 11 years on council, I've obviously seen some change. But thinking back, the change always seemed to be more incremental. Positions would change, but I can't ever recall having as much change at one time as we do right now in this period. And I think you'd all agree that rapid change can sometimes cause apprehension, and I must admit that initially I was a little apprehensive. The idea of this many new faces in our community, it caused a lot of us to wonder aloud, what would things be like in the future? But the good news that I offer today is that the apprehension is gone. In fact, not only is the apprehension gone, it has been replaced with enthusiasm. Enthusiasm for the opportunities that lie ahead. I believe your city and your chamber have brought the right people to the right positions at the right time. I'm so confident in that statement and so enthusiastic about our future that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe the state of our city is that it is renewed, recharged, and more importantly, resolved. Resolved to continue building upon the success that's been Round Rock. Now, let me make one side note here. When I talk about that enthusiasm for the future and for some new faces, that does not mean that I'm enthusiastic about the other faces that are gone. In this past year, we lost some very distinguished servants to this community. Former City Manager Jim News, former Planning Director Jim Stendebach, former Library Director Dale Rickliffs, former Fire Chief Larry Hodge, and even former Business Retention and Expansion Director Charlie Ayers. They all left after some distinguished careers. And this Friday will be Assistant City Manager Cindy Demers' last day after a very long and notable career of service to the city. Cindy, is Cindy here? Where's Cindy? I have to look around. Cindy, thank you for all that you've done for the city. We appreciate it, and your impact really will be felt long after you're gone, so thank you for your service. Now, I mentioned that much of this speech is written for new faces. Here's what I mean by that. With all the heated political debate going on in our country, how many of you have heard this statement in some form or fashion? This country has forgotten what made it so exceptional. We hear something like that almost every day, and I think it's probably a fair statement that applies to our nation. It was interesting to open Round Rock Leader Saturday and see a Brad Stutzman editorial on this very issue. As Brad put it, and I'm quoting, "Our freedoms, our American way of life, whatever you want to call it, is a perishable commodity that can only be replenished by each succeeding generation. It can only be replenished by each succeeding generation. And for a succeeding generation to continue our American way of life, then it only makes sense that they must know about it." And I don't think that's the role solely of our educational institution, but of each one of us individually. But let me ask you this. Does the importance of history apply only to nations, or does it also apply to smaller groups, such as communities? Well, I would submit to you today that the history of a community is just as important to that community as the nation's is to it. Now, community way of life, I'll call it the Round Rock way of life for today, is also, as Brad said, a perishable commodity that relies on each succeeding generation. And we've all heard it in some form or fashion. Round Rock is a special place. Round Rock does things differently. There's a Round Rock spirit. All of these variations are really pointing to an intangible quality about our community. We may call it different things, but the bottom line is that it does exist. And if it does exist, then we must also recognize, as Brad said, that it's a perishable commodity that relies on each succeeding generation. Which brings us to all these new faces, not just those I mentioned, but keep in mind that Round Rock has grown by leaps and bounds with a current population of 100,000. Think of it this way. Roughly 40% of the population of Round Rock was not here when the Round Rock Express threw out its first pitch. Roughly 2/3 of the population of Round Rock was not here when Dell opened its headquarters. Roughly 80% of the population of Round Rock was not here when Old Settlers Park was acquired or Round Rock Hospital opened. And lastly, Charles Goodnight was still running cattle drives through Brushy Creek when Big Boy Hester was born. Now, given all those new residents that have come since Big Boy, these future generations, this succeeding generation of leaders, I believe it's important to help educate them on that intangible attitude that's been instrumental in Round Rock's success. So what I want to do today is clearly a deviation from what you would normally expect in a state of address. I'm going to spend some time talking about the past. Now, this is not a Round Rock history lesson. There's plenty of other people far more qualified to do that. But I want to give some examples of how some difficult and controversial decisions that were made in the past, how those have provided us with opportunities today, and opportunities that we would not otherwise have. I think you'll see some common themes emerge from these examples. Looking back with hindsight, some even may appear to be no-brainers, but they were actually calculated risks. You also notice something missing from some of these examples. You won't see some blind allegiance to some political philosophy on either end of the spectrum. There was neither an attitude that government was always the best one suited to solve the problem, or that all taxes were always bad all the time. And lastly, I believe the most important common theme is that the decisions that I'm going to highlight came about because of a genuine love, and I'm going to even borrow a word from Mayor Maxwell, a passion for this community. And in that regard, I'm honored to have a special guest, 4 of the individuals who helped usher Round Rock to where it is today, and that's Mayors Robinson, Maxwell, Steluka. Y'all didn't sit in order. Steluka and, okay, sorry, Culpepper. Gentlemen, thank you for all your contributions to get us to where we are today. Could we have a round of applause for our mayors? I bet if you went and asked them what their motivation was, what was driving them at the time, you would get a very simple answer. They were motivated to build a city and an economy where their children could get an education and then get a quality job right here in Round Rock. Now, interestingly, there's some scientific research to support what I'm offering. In November of last year, there was a Gallup study called The Soul of the Community. And they spent 3 years interviewing 43,000 people in 26 different cities. And in a nutshell, they found that people's love and passion for their community is a leading indicator for local economic growth. The cities with the highest level of love and passion, they called it community attachment. They also had the highest rates of GDP growth over time. There were some surprising results that we need to remember. 3 of the community qualities consistently emerged in the survey as the leading drivers of that community attachment. And those were social offerings, openness, and beauty. Now, surprisingly, they beat out some of the other possible drivers that we might expect, like perceptions of the local economy, leadership, and safety. Now, the gentleman who conducted the survey for Gallup, his name is John Clifton, he said it this way: our theory is that when a community's residents are highly attached, they will spend more time there, spend more money there, they're more productive, and tend to be more entrepreneurial. So if we're going to take anything from that Gallup study, it's that we all have the obligation to continue building a community that we are proud of. So proud, in fact, that we find ourselves subconsciously or consciously, either way, we spend more time here, we spend more money here, and we make it better for our children and future generations. And again, that's part of what we're doing here today, showing how decisions of the past can have such an important role in building our current opportunity. Now, I'm going to give a few examples. These are not chronological. They're not in any particular order other than how I wanted to use them. And believe me, these are just a few examples that I could use. In fact, Jim Bowles called me literally 30 minutes ago and said, I thought of something else. I said, Jim, I'm taking stuff out of the speech, not putting in the speech. But the first one I want to talk about, I'm going to call the big one. Back in the early 90s, there was a small growing company in Austin that was looking for a place to locate. Fortunately for us, our city leaders at the time were in full-blown economic development and recruiting mode, and other cities were not. So a lucrative incentive deal was put together for the company that turned out to be Dell. Under the agreement, sales tax generated on sales within the state of Texas would be shared with Dell. Now, at the time, the deal was actually controversial. Consider that the city had never offered such a large incentive deal, and the whole idea incentives was relatively new. It required a fight with the city of Austin. Dell's financial condition was nothing like it is today, and I'm even told laptops were catching on fire at the time. And about that time, Williamson County had just denied tax incentives to Apple Computer because they were offering benefits for domestic partners. And keep in mind also, in early 1990s, the internet's not what it is today. So this is what you would definitely call one of those calculated risks. But it was also bold and it was forward-looking, and leaders like Robinson and Culpeper held their ground, they made their case, and the rest, they say, is history. So what opportunity has flown from that? Well, how about roughly 15,000 jobs in Central Texas is a good starting place. And how many businesses, whether they be restaurants or suppliers or real estate or dry cleaners, are here because of those employees and because of their presence here? It's such a huge impact, I'm not even going to try to measure it. But let me mention some things that can be measured, and that's the effect on the city budget and the relative tax burden. Because of sales tax generated by Dell, our property tax rates are among the lowest in the state. 1/2 of the city's revenue comes from sales tax, but of that, roughly 35% of our sales tax is generated by that single company, Dell. Now, that creates some challenges that we continue to deal with, but the bottom line is that Dell has a huge positive impact on the city and its taxpayers. Think back to 1992, the tax rate was 62.5 cents. Today, it's 41 cents. Now, during our regular meeting with Dell executives yesterday, it was pointed out that since 1995, Dell has generated, get this, $300 million in sales tax for the city of Round Rock. That's right, $300 million since 1995. Now, it's interesting how taking advantage of one opportunity actually leads to other opportunities that lead to other opportunities, and you might say that some opportunities just compound themselves. The case of the 4B sales tax election was just such an example. In the late 90s, Dell's business was exploding, and if you remember, so was traffic, to the point that Dell sent a message to city leaders that said no more growth could take place here under existing conditions. So the community began an effort to vote itself a 1/2 cent sales tax that would be dedicated solely to transportation improvements. Now, believe me, that was not an easy undertaking. Remember what I mentioned earlier about allegiances to political ideology. Even though traffic was at a gridlock, the city's largest employer was threatening to move or halt growth, there were still those opposed to the tax. The result was a hard-fought election, but the tax passed overwhelmingly. And then leaders like Mayor Steluka began focusing on transportation improvements to bring the city infrastructure closer to where it needed to be. Now today, that 1/2 cent sales tax generates approximately $14 million a year. Tying that back to Dell, of that $14 million, approximately $5 million of that comes strictly from Dell. And by leveraging these funds with contributions from state, county, private developers, we've constructed almost $500 million worth of roadway. Now, while we're on the subject of sales tax, let's talk about another sales tax that much less known. It was brought to the voters in the late 80s, but it's an incredibly important sales tax. Under the proposition at the time, an additional 1/2 cent of sales tax was created, but could be only used to directly reduce the property tax. Now, Mayor Robinson will confirm that adding a tax is not easy, but in this case, the direct benefit could be seen. And as a result of the voters authorizing that 1/2 cent sales tax, the property tax rate today in Round Rock is 19 cents less than it otherwise would be. Now, here's another big decision that was made and some opportunity it created. Back in the early part of the decade, the city was approached by the Avery family. We want to donate 100 acres of land to Texas State University, they said, but we need you to get utilities to the site. Now, the site they were talking about was literally a cornfield. It was a favorite dove hunting location for a number of individuals. It was miles off the interstate, surrounded by what else but other cornfields. Now, the Avery's idea, I started to call it a plan, but anybody who knows John Avery knows that his ideas start way before you can call them a plan. His idea was for Texas State University to construct a building that would house Texas State and ACC. Of course, looking back from where you sit today, the idea seems perfectly brilliant, but keep in mind several things back in that time frame. One, as I mentioned, the land was in the middle of nowhere. Two, the Texas legislature would have to approve it, and they claimed to have no money. It sounds familiar. Three, even if they did have money, 2003 was not a session for issuance of TRBs or tuition revenue bonds, which is what the universities need to build buildings. And four, the city would be installing utilities to get a building that would generate no direct tax revenue. So in other words, it made all perfect sense. So Round Rock did what Round Rock did best. It went to work. Maxwell walked the halls. The city and the chamber lobbied. Our representatives went to bat. And in the end, Texas State got its TRB because Tropical Storm Allison flooded downtown Houston in 2001. I bet you hadn't heard that one. Because of the massive flooding, a TRB bill was actually filed for damaged schools in Houston, and so the result was that the Round Rock TRB was attached to that bill. So what opportunities did that create for Round Rock? Well, I submit to you that the first decision was a seed that grew into everything that you see today on University Boulevard. From that first seed grew a decision by Seton to build a state-of-the-art hospital next door. From that first seed, a decision by Scott and White Hospital to expand its presence to the facility that you now see on University. From that first seed grew a decision by Texas A&M Health Science Center to build the medical school that's within a stone's throw of here. From that first seed grew a decision by Texas State University to enter nursing education and construct the beautiful building that we are all sitting in today. And remember how I've been talking about compound opportunities. Austin Community College is a perfect example of that. By planting the first seed, ACC became so successful that it needed its own space. So they approached this community about joining the ACC district. Now that sounds easier than it really is. What it really means is you got to vote yourself a new tax. But the community came together, delivered a positive and convincing message, and in the end, they voted overwhelmingly to join the district. In turn, ACC said they planned to build the largest campus in the district, a campus which opened just last fall at capacity with about 5,000 students. Now, I believe that Round Rock's reputation as a healthcare destination and a destination for education will advance the growth and diversification of the economy in ways that we can only imagine. Now, changing gears a little bit, how many of you realize that Old Settlers Park used to be located at Highway 620 and I-35 where McDonald's is today? Not very many people's hands just went up. Quite honestly, I didn't either until I was researching this speech. Well, as the story goes, back in the early 80s, the Old Settlers Association was selling that land, but there was a restrictive covenant that if the land were ever sold, the funds had to be paid to the city of Round Rock. So the city and the association began discussing an acquisition of park space that we now know today is Old Settlers Park. Under the deal, the city got the bulk of the land and the association got land that they could use as well. Now again, looking back from today's perspective, the acquisition of the park seems perfectly logical, but consider a few things. The park would be larger than Zilker Park in Austin. It required the sale of a park already in downtown Round Rock and replaced it with a location that was nowhere near the population growth. Heck, it wasn't even near anything. Remember, at that time, Round Rock was growing west, not east. But it also required significant funds to help develop an active park, and one of the undivided interest owners of the land was not a willing seller, so his interest had to be taken by eminent domain. Nonetheless, in spite of all those obstacles and reasons not to do it, the land was acquired, and the opportunities that have flown from that decision have been numerous. I could spend all day just listing programs available at Old Settlers Park, from soccer to football to baseball to the Rockin' River. But since time's limited, let me focus on a couple of the compound opportunities that you might not have tied to Old Settlers Park. Back in 97, 98 time frame, Mayor Culpeper was contacted by Reed Ryan, son of Hall of Fame pitcher Nolan Ryan, and Reed indicated that they wanted to buy a minor league baseball team and relocate it somewhere in central Texas. So Charlie and team went to work trying to figure out if it was feasible to build in Round Rock. Now keep in mind, Austin had already failed twice in efforts to bring a minor league baseball team to town, and a previous effort in Round Rock had also been rejected. So this is far from a slam dunk. Now about that time, the Thielander family expressed an interest in selling their farmland that was adjacent to Old Settlers Park. So the group went out and they scouted the fields as a location. Now at the time, the leaves were off the trees, and Nolan looked north towards Old Settlers Park, and he saw the baseball fields on the hill in the park. This is where it needs to be, were his words to Charlie. Now I mentioned that Charlie and his team went to work figuring out how to make the deal work, and at the same time, others went to work to try to keep the deal from working. And the result was an election that had an unprecedented turnout, and the vote for professional baseball in Round Rock was overwhelming. The Round Rock Express has had an incredible positive effect on the community, not just from an economic development standpoint, but also for creating a sense of pride and identity for our community. Now, other opportunities have flown from Old Settlers Park as well. A number of years ago, the city began examining ways to increase its tourism potential. After all, tourism is an excellent form of economic development because people come to town, they leave their money, and then they go home. And because we were so dependent on Dell sales tax, we badly needed to seek out ways to diversify the economy. So after studying Round Rock's strengths and weaknesses from a tourism standpoint, the Sports Capital of Texas campaign was born. Now, youth sports is a huge business. I dare say that everyone in this room has traveled somewhere to watch a child or a grandchild or a relative play in some kind of tournament. Now, when I wasn't writing speeches this weekend, I was in Austin at a basketball tournament. And yes, I even spent money in Austin. That's just the way it works. But in selecting the Sports Capital of Texas as a tourism campaign, this primary strength that we had in making that decision was the potential provided by Old Settlers Park. The park had already proven itself as a huge sports draw, had great possibility, but it needed an extreme makeover. So under the leadership of Mayor Maxwell, the city undertook about $18 million worth of improvements to the facilities. And the result is the first-class facilities that you see today. But that campaign would not work on facilities alone. It required creative marketing, hard work, and a buy-in from the community. And last year alone, through events sponsored by our CVB, the participants' direct spending in Round Rock was well over $8 million. Now, the actual economic development impact of that investment would be the number of times that $8 million rolls over in the economy. But since this effort was created, the direct spending has been over $50 million. So it's obviously been very successful. But, and there's a but, because of the great success of the Sports Capital of Texas campaign, we are now leaving money on the table each and every weekend. That's because we do not have an indoor facility to host a whole range of indoor activities, whether it's basketball or volleyball or cheerleading. I'm proud to report that your city recognizes that opportunity and has gone to work on establishing an indoor facility. We now know it as the Sports Complex. Now, at the end of last year, we purchased land on North Chisholm Trail Road, surrounded by hotels, surrounded by restaurants, and an easy drive to downtown and all other shopping destinations in Round Rock. We're now working through the many details that will help bring this to a reality, how it will be financed, how it will be operated, how it will be programmed. But the current plan is for the Sports Center to be financed primarily through hotel-motel tax. It will likely even require an increase in that tax to make it work. Now, that's a tax that's not paid by residents, but only by overnight visitors to the city. Some of our hotelers are here today, and they have overwhelmingly supported the effort. Now, that's because 9-year-olds do not travel alone. They bring mom and dad and brothers and sisters and even grandparents. And the most frequent pastime between games is shopping, dining in a pedestrian-friendly setting. That's good news not only for the hotelers, but for all businesses in town and for local taxpayers. By importing capital in the city from out of town, by spending tax dollars here that would not otherwise be spent, the result is that it puts downward pressure on the property tax. And as I said, that's good news for all of us. Now, speaking of past actions that generated that kind of opportunity, this is not the first time the city has undertaken such an endeavor. Mayor Robinson will tell you that during his tenure, one of the problems they had was a lack of move-up or higher-end housing for the executives that they were trying to attract. Their belief was that a golf course could be an incentive to home builders and developers to create that level of housing that was badly needed. Now, the land that is now Forest Creek Golf Course had been foreclosed on by Savings and Loan. They, in effect, offered it to the city if the city would build a golf course. Now, again, put yourself in the shoes of the decision makers back then. The economy was not exactly stellar, and the construction of a golf course was by no means a sure thing. But as usual, they rolled up their sleeves and figured out how to make it work with creative financing and some collaborations. The result is obvious today. Forest Creek and the surrounding area is one of the nicest developments in Central Texas. Now, the goal of the golf course is much the same as the goal of the sports complex. Neither is expected to be a profit center. Their purpose is to spur growth, generate tax base, import capital, and be economic drivers. Now, there's a couple other past actions I want to mention because I think they set the stage for quality of life that we share today. And the first you've already heard a little bit about, and that's Round Rock Hospital. Back in the 80s, one of the concerns that kept coming up from an economic development standpoint was a lack of medical care. If the community was to be attractive to outsiders, it needed a local hospital. Without medical care, companies were not even looking at the city. So as Jim Bowles tells the story, they went to work to get one. Now you might ask, as I did, what's the problem with getting a hospital locate here? Well, careful what you ask Jim, because I certainly got an earful on that one. You see, it's not quite that simple. In order for a hospital locate, the community had to first acquire a certificate of need from some state agency. Finding a hospital group that wanted to locate here seemed to be the easy part, but convincing the agency to give the certificate, well, that was the hard part, especially when the competition did not want it to open. Suffice it to say that lawyers were hired. There was a real dog and cat fight to get the certificate. But in the end, through the tenacity of people like Dr. Peters, and because of a strong desire to see the community improve, the hospital opened. Now, of course, at the time, Round Rock Hospital was not a St. David's affiliate. Once St. David's acquired it, the hospital really flourished into what it is today. And Round Rock Medical Center is now a true cornerstone of the healthcare industry that's being built here. And incidentally, the reason we're in the nursing school is because of them as well, because of a generous gift. Now, another one of those past quality of life decisions involves the YMCA. There was a time when youth recreation opportunities in town, well, they were pretty slim. Luckily, our community leaders recognized it and they went to work trying to solve it. And I do mean work. People like Nancy Rabb and Jim, they just wouldn't take no for an answer. Some things have never changed. But they did keep hearing the word no. Austin and Houston said, there is no way this will ever work. But they didn't have any idea who they were dealing with. Through their work with the United Way and some impressive fundraising efforts involving local employers, they raised the funds to get their YMCA charter. And because of that, thousands of children throughout Williamson County now benefit from the Y programs. Now, we've taken a look back at many decisions and actions that have made a huge positive impact. Yes, I've left some decisions out that were also impactful. I certainly could have added more, but I didn't want to keep you through lunch, and the kids need to get back to school. And yes, I have failed to mention many people who were instrumental in those decisions and those actions. But the reality is that most of those people didn't do it for recognition. They did it because of a genuine love for their community, so I figured they'd give me a pass anyway. And yes, I'm sure I've gotten some of the facts wrong. But in doing my research for some of these items, I would call 3 people and I would get 3 different answers. So I generally just shot the one in the middle, and that's what you heard today. Again, the purpose of this exercise was not to give an entire history of Round Rock, but it was to give our current and succeeding generation of leaders like we have the Ascend group, a lot of them here today, and guys, thank you all for being here today. but it was to give them a flavor of the spirit that's made Round Rock so successful. For me personally, it was very eye-opening just doing the research. And in the few minutes that I have left, I want to mention some of the decisions and actions that your community faces today. Just like significant decisions of the past, they are not always easy. But hopefully, many years from now, someone will be looking back and giving us good marks for following in the footsteps of our predecessors. Now, I can assure you that your city council has the best interests of the city in mind. Mayor Pro Tem Salinas, council members Honeycutt, and White, and Clifford, Moman, and Whitfield, thank you all so much for your efforts and for your teamwork especially. And Councilmember Honeycutt, a personal thank you to you as you step down next month. It's been an honor and a privilege serving with you all these years. Now, your council continues to advocate for fiscally conservative government. General fund expenditures over the last 3 years have fallen from $87 million to $84 million to $81 million, while at the same time the population has continued to grow. Emphasis will continue to be placed on diversifying the economy, reducing reliance on Dell sales tax, and lower tax and utility rates. Economic development is obviously an integral component of this, and together with our partners at the Chamber, we will do all in our power to help maintain and grow a healthy economy. Now, of course, to grow, we all know that this requires water. The city spent years collaborating and planning a water supply that will take us to our ultimate build-out population. By partnering with Cedar Park and Leander, we saved millions of dollars in that effort. And I'm also proud to say that the first phase is coming in approximately $30 million under budget. The council recently created a drainage utility, and in exchange for a reduction in property taxes, created a small drainage fee. This utility will more fairly allocate the costs of maintaining drainage infrastructure to those that are creating drainage in the first place, and it will be much more sustainable in the long run. Speaking of difficult decisions, the council also recently put into place a recycling program. Not unexpectedly, this change from past garbage service caused a certain amount of heartburn to people who like the old service. But I can assure you that this change was not some effort to be green just for the sake of being green. Rather, it was a practical solution to a very real problem and a recognition that landfill costs will only continue to rise in the future. But your council is not simply focused on economics. As I stated earlier, the attachment to community is just as important, so quality of life issues must be at the forefront. We're currently developing 2 parks in the downtown area, one next to City Hall and one next to the McConaughey building. By creating these senses of place, we hope to encourage more and more people into downtown. That not only creates economic activity, but as the studies show, helps create that connection with your community. Now, let me briefly mention the Play for All Abilities Park. Several years ago, an effort was started to create a park that would serve individuals with disabilities. It was an admirable goal and would satisfy a huge need in the community and the surrounding area. The city offered some funds, some private individuals offered some funds, and the service clubs went to work raising funds. The result is that I'm proud to announce that the groundbreaking for the Play for All Abilities Park, to be built correctly, I might add, will take place in May. Now, when I say to be built correctly, it's because your council recognized that we build facilities for non-disabled kids all the time. And so we did not want to do it halfway. We wanted to do it right. So the council found additional funding to support the Play for All Abilities Park. And that's why I'm saying it will be built right, and the groundbreaking will take place in May. It will be an exciting day for Round Rock and for all of Central Texas. Now, while on the subject of quality of life, I think it's important to point out that for the 6th consecutive year, Round Rock ranks among the safest cities in the country and the 9th safest city in the United States among cities with population greater than 100,000. Last July, Family Circle magazine announced that Round Rock ranks among the best towns and cities across the country for raising families. And here's a great one. Amazon.com named Round Rock the 12th most romantic city in the nation. Now get this, the list was based on sales of romance novels and relationship books, romantic comedy movies, Barry White albums, and sexual wellness products. Now, keep it up, Round Rock. Although it will be hard to stop being, hard to top being such a romantic city, other efforts to have a positive impact on our community are underway. The Round Rock Area Arts Council has done an incredible job in promoting arts in Round Rock. Their events such as the Imagine Art Shows and Downtown Chalk Walks have been hugely successful. And remember the Arts and Culture Strategic Plan, which many of you have participated in, it continues to be developed. For cultural offerings to continue and for them to grow, it will require the participation of the entire community. I know Councilmember Honeycutt is currently working on an expanded Juneteenth festival with the support of a generous grant from the Round Rock Community Foundation. Now that's just one example of how involvement can benefit all of us. With the budget cuts that Round Rock ISD is having to undertake, there are a number of programs on the chopping block which are designed to help our at-risk kids. So I encourage you, if you want to be involved, contact Dr. Chavez or someone with the school district, offer to be a mentor or otherwise participate in the community. Now in closing, I would really like to thank you for your attendance today. I realize that today's state of speech has been a lot different than in the past, but I felt like as much change as we were experiencing, that the time was just right. As I said earlier, I believe that the community is renewed, I think it's recharged, and I think it's resolved to continue building on our past successes and our future opportunities. I am enthusiastic about what these next few years will offer. Now, I would be remiss to not acknowledge the people that really do make it possible for me to do this. That's my wife, Kathy, my daughter, Paige, my son, Chase. They are the ones that put up with my absences, my meetings, and my frustrations, but they are also the ones that give me the energy and strength to keep working hard day after day. Now, many of you remember Paige from her introduction a couple of years ago. It's hard to believe that she heads off to college this fall. But I at least feel confident that she will have the choice, if she wants to return to Round Rock and prosper. And I believe that was the goal of all these people sitting here. Thank you all for coming today, and thank you for your support of this great community.